Yeah, I think what was discussed today, not just from the folks that came up here and presented your opinions and concerns, but also a frank and candid discussion by the panelists up here as well. I was thinking as I was hearing things, this conversation and this input and this solicitation of input, for those of you that have been around for 20 or 30 years, that really wasn't the case that long ago. And my particular experience was when we did the corporate tax reform. We looked at it. Much of the input came from folks like yourselves, specific to C Corporation, but we went through a process. We went through what I would consider to be a prudent process, and I think we got great feedback and ended up with a sound outcome, at least an outcome that doesn't penalize corporations from expanding their footprint and hiring people in the state, which is what we had before. Now, we understand, and I certainly understand, that not just the Rhode Island economy, but the national economy is built on and built by small businesses. But without accurate information, without concrete data, and without expert input, a lot of the things that that we've accomplished would not have been possible. And I think when you look at whether it be the personal income tax, the corporate tax reform, the estate tax, the regulatory reforms that have taken place, much of what ended up in those proposals came from many of you. And so I think it's a point that should not be underemphasized, in that your input, your participation, and when you're solicited for that input, it certainly has an impact. I believe it's going to continue to have an even greater impact. But all the good things that we've talked about here today, I think, are testament to those contributions making their ways into what we all want, and that is to improve the state. The Senate's priorities are going to continue to be and to build upon some of the initiatives that we've worked on in collaboration with our colleagues in the House, in collaboration with the administration. We're actively participating. For example, we've talked a lot about education, and not only the delivery of education, but the funding of education. We're actively participating in the working group now that's looking at in great detail the education funding formula and talking about realities that we have to address if we want to move forward. They're not all popular. They're not all things that everyone's going to agree upon, but we have to recognize what our challenges are and build upon those to move forward. Continue to build on the regulatory reform. I was chatting earlier with Marie Ganem, our policy director. In my business, we moved our office location a few years ago, and we ended up building out a brand new space. And the contractor that we hired, given that I'm a planner, I said, listen, I need to have a general idea of timeframes here so we can make this move effectively with as minimal interruption as possible. And the contractor happens to do work all over the state and outside of the state, and he said, I can't give you a time frame because each municipality interprets the codes differently, has their own regulations on top of what's already federal and state regulations. So I'd love to give you a time frame, but I can't. And we continue to hear, unfortunately, that's the case. And we've got a number of communities that are participating in the electronic permitting process, which was one of the Senate's initiatives dating back to 2010. But what we'd like to see, once the kinks are worked out, is that every community not only is on that system, but that we can move toward adopting a more uniform set of rules, regulations, and requirements so that, as was mentioned earlier, folks aren't getting different answers and different interpretations wherever they happen to knock at our cities and towns. Workforce development's another theme that we've continued to talk about and tied directly to education. One thing that I want to make point, and I guess to add also to what the treasurer said, one of the things that we have taken, I believe, to be a prudent approach with the House in the budget process, is to try to incorporate as much as possible, predictability, and that continues to be a theme that we hear from all of you. When we're going to make investments, if we're going to expand, we need to have some idea of predictability. And we've been conservative in a way in trying to make sure that we not only pass what's an effective budget, but also try to be prudent. Let's not count on anticipated revenues if we're not sure that we're absolutely going to get them. Let's not count on savings if we're not sure that we're going to get all of them. And so we've discounted an entire quarter in some cases of revenues that we may not receive or savings that we may not receive, and try to take a much more prudent approach to budgeting. One particular area that is going to be not only a priority for me personally, but I'm expecting for the Senate as well. And the Treasurer mentioned this, and I look forward to working with his office. They're ultimately responsible for the mechanics of debt, but it's debt. We have significant challenges. We all know what they are. And as the Governor mentioned, projects are not only desires, but they're all very, very important. But we still don't have a comprehensive idea and understanding of what our total debt situation looks like. Before the holidays, I asked the Senate Fiscal Advisor and the Senate Fiscal Office, well before the holidays, to get me the information to figure out and try to get our arms around this whole debt discussion. As of this morning, I still didn't get the information, not because they didn't provide it to me, but they couldn't get it. And we're talking about, a month later. And we need to really look at this in a comprehensive way. As the Treasurer mentioned and testified to the other day, over 100 entities within the state of Rhode Island and local governments that have the ability to issue and authorize debt. In the last 24 months alone, the state has issued $452 million in new debt. When you talk about, which has been reported recently, the Narragansett Bay Commission, whatever toll or transportation policy we adopt, and the Turnpike and Bridge Authority, those three alone, we're talking about close to $1 billion in new debt. The Board of Education, specifically within higher ed, and we've continued to invest in higher ed, and I don't think that story has been told as much, but in the budget request, $536 million in additional borrowing that would be requested. Now, the board whittled that down to $416 million, but that's on top of the $175 that was already approved in the last two budget cycles. And so this is not in any way a judgment or intended to be a judgment on any particular proposal, on any particular project, on any particular entity, or quasi-public, because quite frankly, we've all voted for these things in the past, because at the end of the day, they're all very good ideas, and not only good ideas, but also necessities, given how long we have neglected some of our infrastructure and how long we haven't made important investments. But as the Governor mentioned, and as the Speaker as well, we need to have priorities. But in order for us to make prudent, informed, and educated decisions, we need to know what we're dealing with. We need to know what we're talking about. And that's not, the numbers I rattled off to you doesn't even include unfunded local pension and OPEB liabilities as well. So it's a significant problem that we need to, hopefully sooner rather than later, begin to have a frank, candid conversation about. And I look forward to, in the very near future, introducing legislation and continuing to work, as I said, with the Treasury, because they're ultimately responsible for the mechanics and some of the findings that they've already discovered. But we need to have a frank conversation about that, because if we don't, we will certainly imperil, in my opinion, the predictability of the future fiscal health of not only the state, but also our local governments and our quasi-publics as well. So I want to just close by saying it's been a pleasure to be here, to participate, to listen to you and also my colleagues in government here. And the Senate's door is always open, and on behalf of the Senate Finance Committee, our door is always open as well. We've been more than happy to get and solicit your input in the past, and we'll continue to do so in the future. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.